I think we've had people joining now, so I think it's okay for me to start. We've been waiting for everyone to join the webinar, but it's 4 minutes past 1, and we're due to start at 1. So I'm going to start and introduce the event today. Hello everyone. I'm Aswini Weeraratne. I'm one of the vice chairs of the Bar Human Rights Committee of England and Wales, BHRC, and on behalf of the BHRC, I'm delighted to be hosting this virtual panel event, bringing leading lawyers and civil society representatives together to spotlight serious concerns about human rights violations and the rule of law in Bangladesh. This panel event is the 5th and final in our Diminishing Democracy series, following earlier events on India, held in September 21, on Sri Lanka in October 22, on Pakistan in February of this year, and on Myanmar in June. We're so pleased to welcome you to this occasion. I understand many of you have come to several of the earlier events, and some of you have even attended all of them. So we are very grateful for your support of this initiative. The discussions from all 5 events will, over the summer, be synthesized into a report and recommendations that will be published later this year by BHRC. It will endeavour to outline the key areas where bar associations, civil society lawyers, and human rights defenders overall, both in Bangladesh and in the overall community, international community, can use their leverage and ensure that human rights and the rule of law are protected. The situation in Bangladesh is one of significant rule of law and human rights challenges that continue to adversely impact human rights defenders, including lawyers, judges, and NGO workers. We're going to try and cover a lot of ground in this webinar. So freedom of speech and dissent, cornerstones of democracy, as we know, are under severe pressure in Bangladesh. Since the introduction of the Digital Security Act in 2018, numerous human rights defenders, journalists, and critics have been arrested and charged under its wide-ranging and vaguely worded provisions, many of which, according to the leading free speech NGO Article 19, are in breach of international human rights law, and which vest sweeping blocking powers in a government agency. Many have faced severe legal reprisals for expressing critical views, leading to self-censorship and a chilling effect on freedom of expression, with the act routinely used to target journalists and critics of the government. The alarming trend of enforced disappearances and extrajudicial killings continues to threaten those who dare to speak out against injustices. Human rights activists, government critics, and members of opposition parties have reported cases of abductions and disappearances, creating a climate of fear that inevitably impedes the work of defenders and increasingly is also targeting the families of human rights defenders, both in country and in exile. According to Human Rights Watch, although security forces in Bangladesh have long committed grave human rights abuses, including torture and extrajudicial executions, including under previous governments, enforced disappearances in particular have become a hallmark of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's over decade-long rule. And citing Bangladeshi human rights groups, nearly 600 people have been forcibly disappeared by security forces since Prime Minister Hasina took office in 2009. activists working on women's rights, against child marriage, or advocating for LGBTQI+ community also operate in an extreme and hostile environment. Women and girls face systemic discrimination, violence, and harassment. Despite laws against child marriage, it remains prevalent. And while legal strides have been made, social stigma, discrimination, and violence against members of the LGBTQI+ community remain commonplace. Furthermore, the exploitation of garment workers remains a serious and persistent issue, despite some progress after an intensification of international pressure on Bangladesh after the Rana Plaza tragedy in 2013. These improvements are undermined by exploitatively low wages, with Bangladesh garment workers being the lowest paid in the world, unsafe working conditions, and continual, often deadly reprisals against labor rights activism. Indeed, Shahidul Islam, a union leader campaigning to secure unpaid wages to garment workers, was reported to have beaten to death at the end of June. It's impossible not to mention the treatment of the Rohingya refugees from Myanmar. Bangladesh hosts 1 million refugees, many living in dire conditions in overcrowded camps. Repatriation efforts have failed due to the ongoing crisis in Myanmar, which of course was a critical issue spotlighted in our last event on Myanmar. As we've seen time and again through all of the Diminishing Democracy panel discussions we have hosted in the last 18 months or so, human rights defenders in Bangladesh and across the region need comprehensive support from the international community of legal practitioners, NGOs, and bar associations. And in this session, we seek not only to raise awareness of the need to restore respect for human rights and the rule of law in Bangladesh, but also hope to explore how the international community can more effectively support legal practitioners, judges, and civil society organizations, as well as human rights defenders in Bangladesh. So, in order to do this today, I'm proud to welcome a distinguished panel of guest speakers joining us today. Mohammed Ashrafuzzaman, also known as Zaman, Program Coordinator at Asian Legal Resource Center, Asian Human Rights Commission. Zaman is a Bangladeshi human rights activist exiled in Hong Kong. He represents the Asian Legal Resource Center, ALRC, to the United Nations as its main representative. Zaman heads the Bangladesh country desk at the Asian Human Rights Commission, a sister concern of the ALRC. He advocates for enhanced accountability for gross human rights violations, including enforced disappearances, extrajudicial executions, torture, and arbitrary detention, including before UN human rights mechanisms. Zaman is interested in examining the functionality and competence of the justice institutions in upholding the rule of law in his country of origin and in the Asian region. We also welcome Sultan Mohammed Zakaria, an expert on democratic governance, human rights, and geopolitics in the South Asia region, with a focus on Bangladesh, China, India, and Pakistan, and is Amnesty International's USA South Asia researcher and country specialist for Bangladesh and Pakistan. So welcome also to Sultan. After Sultan, you will hear from Shahanur Islam. Shahanur is a human rights activist and lawyer and founder and general secretary of JusticeMakers in Bangladesh. Shahanur is a Bangladeshi human rights defender and lawyer who has dedicated his career to defending the rights of ethnic and indigenous minorities and sexual and gender minorities. He's represented victims of torture, extrajudicial executions, and enforced disappearances by law enforcement agencies. Shahanur is founder of JusticeMakers in Bangladesh and has been instrumental in leading criminal cases against Rapid Action Battalion and the army for acts of torture and murder. He's been a prominent advocate for the rights of LGBTQI+ individuals in Bangladesh. Despite facing repeated death threats, intimidation, and physical attacks, Shahanur remains steadfast in his activism. Mary Lawler, UN Human Rights Special Rapporteur, tweeted her support for him just last week. He's awarded the JusticeMaker Fellowship in 2010 by the International Bridges to Justice organization in Switzerland, and since January 23, He's been a laureate of the Marianne Initiative for Human Rights Defenders based in France. Thank you for joining us, Shahanur. And last but not by any means least, our warmest welcome to Kalpana Akhtar, founder and executive director of the Bangladesh Center for Workers' Solidarity and an ambassador for the Circle, an advocacy group working to overcome poverty and empower women around the world. Kalpana is a labor activist from Bangladesh on garment workers' rights, who was awarded the Human Rights Watch's Alison Deforge Award for Extraordinary Activism in 2016. She helped to found the Bangladesh Garment and Industrial Workers Federation in 2003 and founded the Bangladesh Center for Workers' Solidarity in 2000. So Kalpana, welcome. So thank you to our valued speakers with an array of impressive experience to share, and to all our guests for joining today. We'll make some time for extended Q&A once we've heard from each speaker, and there should be plenty of time for questions. So please pop them in the chat box so that we can keep an eye on them, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. So with that, I'm going to turn immediately to our first speaker, who is Zaman. And if I could ask you please to unmute yourself, Zaman. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ashrafuzzaman. I very much appreciate this opportunity and thank Bar Human Rights Committee of England and Wales for hosting this event on Bangladesh. And it's a very well-deserving event to talk about human rights and rule of law of the country. So I'm straight going to the issues. I mean, when we talk about human rights and democracy, then both are inseparable from each other. To have a functional democracy, we must have human rights.
Oh, Zaman, you're breaking up a little bit, I'm afraid. So I'm just going to interrupt for a minute because your sound is broken up slightly.
Okay.
So you can come a bit closer to the microphone, maybe that'll help.
Okay, so can I be heard properly now? Is it okay?
Definitely,
okay.
That's much better. Thank you very much.
Okay, okay. So, I mean, a functional democracy and human rights are inseparable. And when we can see that both working if we have a legitimate representative government in place in a country, if we have a system of checks and balances at the parliamentary level and also at the judicial institutions of any given country, then we need to have, I mean, the institutions, the other institutions of governance and rule of law, whether statutory or non-statutory executive bodies, everything should have the competence. And with the professional excellence, having the notion and the implementation of separation of power. And one of the key component in today's time could be the notion of sustainable development, particularly the institutional competence mentioned in Goal 16, having access to the institutions and particularly access to justice. Then we also need to have civic space allowing the people to have their active participation for the development activities in a country. Now, when we come to see the situation of Bangladesh, if we ask the question that, does the country have a system of parliamentary accountability? The answer to that question is a big no. And why this is no? Because there is a government which doesn't have legitimacy. People did not vote for it. And in reality, the people's right to vote has been hijacked long before, I mean, almost a decade ago. So the next aspect is the system of judicial accountability. When we ask the same question, does the country have a judicial system of accountability? Again, unfortunately, the answer is a big no. And I can explain that. And to have a judicial accountability, what the people need, particularly anybody who is offended by a human rights violation or a crime, regardless of the identity or race or ethnicity. So does people have the universal access to justice mechanism in Bangladesh? Again, unfortunately, the answer is no. And how does it happen? The law enforcement agencies, particularly the police, has the statutory authority to control the complaint mechanism in the country. And the complaint mechanism doesn't function independently. The example is such that when the Rapid Action Battalion abducts any person and then the person remains disappeared for days or weeks or months, and the family approaches the police to register a case with the police about that particular abduction and enforced disappearances, despite having evidence, either on CCTV camera or having eyewitnesses who saw that the person was being picked up in vehicles of people showing the identity card of Rapid Action Battalion or wearing the uniform of Rapid Action Battalion or other police agencies, law enforcement agencies. The police do not register the complaint. That is the established practice. So very few people who try to register complaint registered case in the magistrate court, in the common law system, we have that option. And that those cases have not resulted anything leading to a positive investigation, a credible probe into any of the enforced disappearances cases out of over 650 enforced disappearances cases from January 2009 to June 2023. So now the same condition applies to the cases of extrajudicial executions. I can tell you that nearly 2,700 people have been extrajudicially executed under Sheikh Hasina, and there are also cases before that. So from January 2009 to June 2023, according to the documentation by credible human rights groups, 2,683, to be very specific, people have been extrajudicially executed in Bangladesh. So none of these cases have seen a credible investigation. The one additional part of that, in the cases of enforced disappearances, you can go for a habeas corpus writ to the High Court Division of the Supreme Court of Bangladesh. And around a dozen people, the families, you must know that the litigation in the Supreme Court is extremely expensive for the ordinary poor victims of the country. It requires hundreds of thousands of taka, and it's not everybody else among the top and the most prominent human rights lawyers of the country willing to shoulder the responsibility of providing attorney service or legal support to a victim or a family of enforced disappearance in Bangladesh. You cannot find the best known human rights lawyer's name who has ever represented a victim or a family of enforced disappearances in Bangladesh in last nearly 15 years. Now, around 12 people, the number may be a few less and more, because some people, they don't publicly say that they pursued their litigation. But none of this case in the habeas corpus writ petitions have ever seen an assertive remedy from the High Court Division or the Appellate Division, who is the highest tier of Bangladesh's judiciary. The frustrating picture of that, the attorney generals, the incumbent and in the past, they argued in favor of the perpetrating agencies, the Rapid Action Battalion or the police, whoever it may be. So they defended before the court, saying that these agencies have not abducted or not disappeared any of those people. And the court routinely in few cases issued rule, and that rule has not been addressed anymore further. And those cases remain pending for years. So in that context, you cannot also have judicial accountability, and then use, as I have briefly explained, the nature of the public attorney service in the Supreme Court. It's equally worse or even worse than in the lower court in Bangladesh. This is called officially subordinate judiciary, the sessions court and the magistracy. And there the judicial independence and the legal practice doesn't comply with the human rights norms and standards. It's more likely going by the code of criminal procedures. Whether what code of criminal procedure has a provision or not, that is the everyday discussion in that kind of tiers of the judiciary. So when you don't have a fair universal access to the complaint mechanism, when you don't have a very credible crime investigation system in place, when you don't have a medical legal investigation system or forensic examination system in place with credibility again, and if you don't have professional public prosecutorial service or the attorney service, then you cannot expect fair adjudication. And when we talk about fair adjudication, I can give you one example, that when things go against the executive authorities, that can be the worst thing happen in Bangladesh. Let's take the example of Justice Surendra Kumar Sinha. S.K. Sinha is widely known. Under his Chief Justiceship at the Supreme Court in 2016-17, the government adopted a constitutional amendment called 16th Amendment of the Constitution. It wanted to impeach the judges of the country before the parliament. And parliament since 2014 has not been elected by the people. It is either uncontested or rigged overnight, the previous night. I could show video that BBC published before, that ballot stopped before the election started. Stuffing ballot was full. So I can send the presentation to you after this meeting. So when Supreme Court held that the impeachment of judges before the parliament was constitutional, then the Supreme Court Chief Justice was removed forcibly. He was forced to leave the country and forced to leave his office. And he has written about that, publicly said about that. I know my fellow speakers, they know more about that, they can explain more. So in this context, as you initially said, Aswini, that the freedom of expression and reprisals are a big challenge in Bangladesh. So that is the everyday phenomena. A journalist living in UK or United States, when they speak out, their extended family members like brothers or sisters, they are detained arbitrarily under the Digital Security Act and other laws. And or even journalists staying in Sweden, when he speaks out, publishes reports on corruption, then his mother gets harassed in the midnight in eastern part of Bangladesh, a retired senior citizen. So in these given, like if I say the situation of my colleague Adilur Rahman Khan, who is the secretary and Supreme lawyer, secretary of human rights organization Odhika, today he appeared before the court to face prosecution at the Cyber Tribunal of Dhaka. And the crime that he has committed is investigated cases of extrajudicial killings back in 2013 and submitted those reports to the UN special mandates experts, like Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial execution and torture. So, I mean, cooperating with the UN in human rights mechanism and helping the victims of gross human rights violations is understood to be a crime by this government in Bangladesh. So that we have been seeing repeatedly. And if you ask me whether there is any consequence for that, it's impossible. there is only few things available: or impunity for the perpetrators, and denial of access to justice for the victims, and rewards for the perpetrators. So when I say rewards, what are they? The rewards are like the people who had the command responsibilities having their hands stained with blood of extrajudicial execution of a large number and enforced disappearances. So this police chief, the former chiefs of Rapid Action Battalion, they made ambassadors of Bangladesh in abroad, in Spain, in Saudi Arabia, or even Integrity Award. So anyone wants proof, I mean, there are plenty of provable evidence for that. And then also gallantry awards. Government gives them medals for like prominent photographer, Shahidul Islam. The world knows him very well by the name of Bangladesh. He is a Bangladeshi, very prominent person. So the people who detained him and tortured him, they got rewarded with the Bangladesh Presidential Medal, the police. So this is the situation where we live. And the people live in the country. So now the question is, what is the way forward from here? What so far a little bit worked, because the domestic mechanism for redress is completely exhausted in Bangladesh, and there is no room in the given context. Unless there is a process of democratization initiated and implemented, then the only tools worked a little bit is international sanction. United States Treasury Department designated sanctions against Rapid Action Battalion and 6 of their commanders, and that contributed to a little bit of reducing the number of extrajudicial killings. Stopped. Enforced.
I'm going to interrupt you there for a moment, Zaman. I'm going to just, if you don't mind, that is so, I mean, you have set an extraordinary context to our discussion, and I can see, I mean, there's a lot more that you want to say, and particularly around sanctions and remedies, and I'm going to see whether we can pick that up with you later on. So I'm going to ask you to
I'm
hold
almost done.
for now. Well, continue, just finish up now, and then we'll move on to Sultan.
Yeah, I'm on. Okay, so the only thing the US sanctioned, and they have also announced a new visa policy for the perpetrators who prevent the process of democracy. These two things have created a little bit of fear. So that's why we see in a very recent weeks, the opposition is allowed to host public rallies without their supporters being killed by police firing. And we need to see whether the democratization process is going to work, and it is going to be possible to introduce an electoral process of democracy again in Bangladesh in the coming days. And I stop here, and I would welcome the questions that the audience may have. And I'm looking forward to listen to my colleagues who are about to speak now. Thank you very much.
No, well, thank you very much. That's already given us so much information and pause for thought. But I'm going to turn to Sultan next, who's going to, I think, pick up your themes and extend them into his range. So, Sultan.
First of all, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Bar England and my colleagues joining here. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to speak before you. I think my colleague Zaman has set an excellent context with much details about the human rights situation, and I would say partly the rule of law and democracy in Bangladesh. I wanted to talk about my own personal experience on the rule of law situation in the country. I mean, having involved in research and in advocacy and activism, I have plenty of experience myself, just to share with the audience. So I'd like to start by saying that Bangladesh is like ranked 124th out of 139 countries ranked by the World Justice Project in the Rule of Law Index. So the audience can have a sense of where the country actually is situated, is nearly at the bottom. And in 2018, I was working for Bragg University as an assistant professor and also as a senior research associate. And I had the opportunity to work in the democracy and governance cluster before I joined Amnesty. And I attempted to create a composite index on democratic governance, and just to look at the indices of the rule of law and democracy in Bangladesh. And I think it was an ambitious and bold attempt. We are moving away from the World Bank's Kaufman Index, and we are trying to create an index based on empirical evidence. We conducted like 3 national surveys for that, more than 200 variables. So I would be excited to just share some of my experience working on that project, and then I'll move to my Amnesty experience of how that went on. So we looked at actually 3-dimension primarily. One is the rule of law. The second dimension is accountability and transparency of the government, and third dimension is the democratic participation. And Zaman, I think, has basically illustrated what the rule of law situation is in the country. We basically looked at, based on the participants' experiences, based on our survey, whether the law has been applied equally to everyone. I mean, so we asked our participants that, have you been treated fairly, and have you been discriminated on the same standard? And our respondents was quite unequivocal that in many cases, and anyone has a hint of Bangladesh knows that the laws are not applied equally across all people. So if you are connected to the regime, if you have the muscle, political muscle, either rank and file, or you are a supporter within the elites of the regime, you get advantageous treatments before the administrative court system or the judiciary or the government services, and etc. So there is a sense that if you are close to the regime, you will get preferential treatment across all domain of public life. And my personal experience has also suggests that, especially I think many Bangladeshi people are struggling at the lower court, and I think Zaman can briefly touched on that, how people and also Shahanur work in the lower judiciary, so he can speak more from his own experience how people have the access issues. Like there are number of barriers in accessing the justice system. So in no way the equality before law is a standard in Bangladeshi rule of law system. And there is a popular notion that it's not rule of law, it's a rule by law. I mean, law is applied preferentially in order for the ruling elites to maintain the control over the society. It's not the rule of law, and they consider themselves above the law. And we have number of public incidents. We saw that the sons of members of parliaments, they got preferential treatment despite demonstrating violence in public. Specific incidents are that at least in 2 cases, very widely publicized cases, that the sons of 2 members of parliaments, one hit and killed a pedestrian, but still got away with the killing. And then in one case, a son of a famous member of parliament in Dhaka publicly assaulted a military officials, and they didn't get enough punishment. So I would say the rule of law situation is quite dismal and preferential. The second that I mentioned, I would like to talk about that. The accountability and transparency of the government. So when we talk about the accountability, and for my own index also, I looked at 2 areas, like one set of institutions within the government, which we call horizontal accountability institutions, like the Judiciary, Anti-Corruption Commission, Human Rights Commission, Comptroller and Auditor Generals, how these public institutions hold the government accountable, whether they are able to do their job and actually in effect can hold the government officials accountable for the malfeasance or wrongdoings. And then second set of institutions, the vertical accountability mechanisms, like institutions outside the government, to what extent they are able to hold the government accountable, like the media and civil society or organizations, whether they're able to operate and work freely without fear or favor to hold the government accountable. And we conduct surveys, expert surveys within all institutions. We looked at the data of the public institutions, and unfortunately, that I would say, with very few exceptions, overwhelming majority of the public institutions, the democratic institutions which are supposed to hold these public officials accountable, barely work, including among all the parliament, which is, as Zaman briefly mentioned, has become like a rubber stamp, also not representative since 2014. So parliamentary democratic accountability does not work because the parliament barely represents the people. In 2014, explicitly, that more than 50% of the parliamentary seats were elected, quote unquote, uncontested, because I contest the claim that they were uncontested. They were actually stolen, because when the main opposition party decided not to take part in the elections, the government or the candidates affiliated with the regime, they forced other independent candidates to withdraw, either under duress or by paying bribes and etc. So they forced more than 153 out of 300 constituencies. They forced them out of elections, and they won uncontested. So you see how the nature of democratic accountability, I mean, the primary institution parliaments are working. So once the representation is gone, we can barely talk about how the parliamentary committees are working to hold the government officials accountable. And then if you go down a bit, we have the anti-corruption commissions and human rights commissions. And we see categorically how these institutions, instead of holding the public officials or wrongdoers accountable, they have been abused to actually punish opposition candidates, opposition politicians. So they have become, instead of being independent institutions operating within the government to hold the government accountable, they have become the long arm of the executive branch, and have been used by the head of the government, I would say, because in Bangladesh everything has been personalized in the name of her, by the prime minister to I would say implicate opposition candidates and politicians in the corruption charges. So all these institutions, unfortunately, have lost any semblance of independence, and they have not been, as we say in political science, that they have not been impersonal institutions. So in a democracy, if an institution has to be effective, they has to develop their institution impersonal character, that they have to treat every citizen equally, and they don't see them based on their political preference or ideological preference or ethnicity or color, creed. But unfortunately, that's not the case. So the accountability in the horizontal plane is quite personal, political tool. And in the vertical mechanism, I would say the only ray of hope is that the civil society has been, I mean, since the restoration of democracy in Bangladesh in 1991, civil society has been one of the promising cases. And I would say still it retains some sort of independent voice within the society, but we have seen over the last 10 years a very systematic attempt to suppress civil society voices. The government abused law. Yes, Ashrafuzzaman. Time? Yes, so I'll finish
wrap it up, Sultan.
Yeah.
I don't want to stop you really, because what you're saying is so interesting, but I'll come back to you. I know that. So just if you want to make your last few points.
I'll finish in 2 minutes. Is that okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So the government has abused law to suppress civil society institutions, and both legal, I would say, both legal and extrajudicial measures. So what law is that? NGO, I mean, they use the NGO bureau as an institutions, and they use the registration process, the licensing processes, just to stifle the funding of the NGOs, the civil society organizations. And we also saw intimidation, like sending police, detective branch people. And we have a very known case that the leading human rights organizations of the country, Odhikar, the government suspended their license, they froze their bank accounts, and they have sent police to the other human rights organization, as we know, ASK, Aino Shalishka. So they have, I mean, they try to create a climate of fear, so that people are afraid of their life and live above poverty before they can be able to speak for people. I mean, freedom. And in terms of media, the other important institutions of the vertical accountability mechanism, we have seen a mushroom growth of number of media. So the people may really get confused that there are so many media houses blooming, but the actual freedom of operation, it shrunk because overwhelming majority, it's 90% of the media houses are owned by the government cronies. So the systematically expanded the media just to give a false sense that there is a free freedom, but they are controlled by the people associated, either directly associated with the regime or the regime people itself themselves. And I'll stop here because when we have chance, I'll talk about the democratic participation that I mentioned.
Yes, I appreciate you haven't gone through your research fully, but I have to say that was
Thank you.
not just bleak, but chilling to hear what you have to say. And it's obviously the tip of the iceberg, what both of you have just said. And I'm anticipating it's not going to get any better when we turn to Shahanur, who is going to give us his personal experiences also of operating within this system. So if we can turn to you, Shahanur, thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really honored to be here today and would like to express my sincere gratitude to the Bar Human Rights Committee of England and Wales for organizing this webinar and providing me with the opportunity to discuss the current human rights situation in Bangladesh. Today, I would like to tell about the challenge faced by me and also my personal experience about a human rights defender and also a practicing lawyers in Bangladesh. Before this, I would like to say that in 2022 there is 88 lawyers who have been subjected of the violations. Amongst them, 61 lawyers who are implicated in false and fabricated cases. And from them, 5 lawyers who are implicated by the draconian Digital Security Acts. Due to criticizing the present Prime Minister and her family members and the Prophet Mohammed and also the Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, and they have been arrested in Bangladesh. And you know that in Bangladesh Constitution grants the independence of the judiciary, but in practice, the judicial system is not enjoy the independence. This situation undermines the fair administration of justice and hinders access to justice for marginalized communities and individuals. You know that recent 2 incidents. One is the speech made by the mayor of the Dhaka City Corporation, Fazlur Taposh, in a meeting of Bangladesh Bangabandhu INGB Porishad. There he is clearly told that the last one of Chief Justice in Bangladesh, they forcefully compelled him to resign. And also, we hear one phone conversation between the law minister and a judge of special tribunal for women and children in Dhaka, discussing direction for a judgment in a gang rape case. That is clearly indicate interference in the judiciary by the ruling party. And most of the political cases, the judiciary in Bangladesh is influenced by the government. And if you see the appointment of court staff from the last couple of years, most of the staff from the law ministers' home districts are appointed all around the country, all around the 64 districts. And this is also a big concern about the influence of government on the judiciaries. About the court proceeding and bribe, you know, in Bangladesh, there is a common saying in Bengali, common dialogue, that no document in the court system can be proceed without giving a bribe. Even the brick walls of the court buildings are said to demand bribes. Throughout the various stages of legal proceeding, the bribe system is involved. This includes the court staff, the GRO office, public prosecutors, police personnel, and this is most of the time during the time of a filing case, bail issues, trial process, setting the date of the court hearing, reading the court documents, obtain court certified copies. All the stages you need the bribe. This is my personal experience. When I started the practicing directly, I tried to don't give the bribe, but due to the environment of the court, it is not possible. If you stand against the bribe alone, you cannot practice the court. This is the reality. For example, in order to initiate judicial activities, submitting a complaint petition to the magistrate court. When you submit a complaint petition, you should pay the bribe at first to the court peshkar to receive this complaint petition. Then, after the taking the statement by the magistrate, when the another peon come to sign these documents by the complainant, then you should pay the bribe. If you don't pay, they will make the hindrance. Again, when the order should be signed by the judges, you should pay the bribe to the peshkar. It is peshkar means the court assistant. Then during the submitting the legal process, you should pay the bribe to the court process server. If you don't give them bribe, they will not serve the process to the concerned people, and they will make delay, and they will make this to get a lot of time. This is only one sector of filing cases in the magistrate court. If you and there is a specific demand of bribe. There is some amount of demand, and it is dependent on different district, different process. In Naugan, it is I am telling about my practical experience. During the time of filing the case, you should pay 200 Bangladesh taka to the peshkar. It is compulsory. As like us, and during the time of bail petition, if it is the GR case, at first during the time of put up, you should pay the GRO for find out the documents. Then when you submit the bail petition to the office, then again you should pay the bribe to the GRO. After and then you should pay the bribe to the court sub inspector, who is basically trying to oppose the bail application. If you don't give him bribe, you will not get the bail. And if you get if the court had granted the bail, again you should pay the bribe to the court sub-inspector for validating the bail bond. And after validate the bail bond, you should come to the submit it to the again to the GRO, and that times again you should pay the bribe to the government record officer. And finally, who send this bail bond to the prison, you should pay the bribe also that pay on clerk. This is the system in Bangladesh. It's continuing, and everywhere you cannot if you don't want to give this bribe, you cannot practice there. And another thing is that if this is the trial court, then if this is the same process and you should pay this stage, but there is another stakeholder will come, that is the public prosecutor. He is the responsible for the trial court and also in the judges court. The public prosecutor, additional public prosecutor, and the assistant public prosecutor, they are the responsible to represent the government. And that time, you should pay the bribe to the public prosecutor. And it is mandatory. And their demand is higher than the court staff and also the court GROs. And finally, in trial process, you should pay the bribe to the public prosecutor to produce the witness before the court. If you don't pay them the bribe, you never produce the witness, and they make it the lengthy, and it will be more 1 and 2 days again and again they should come. So if you want to do smoothly, you should pay the bribe to the public prosecutor too. And sometimes there is a culture when the public prosecutors, they're trying to do some compromise of outside of the court. And for this process, the public prosecutor take the money from both the accused and also both the complainant in Bangladesh. And there is another thing has happened during the time. The court staff, they take bribe from both of the complainant and accused to pursue the judgment in favor of them. They take both of the complainant and the accused, and also sometimes the public prosecutor, they took the money from the client, accused and complainant for pursue the judgment in favor of them. This is the open things, and all of the judges, magistrates, they know about this, and all of the court staff, all of the lawyers, bar association, everybody knows that, but nobody take any initiative to stop this. And so, who have money, he is able to get remedy earlier. Who have not money, he is not get the remedy from the court system. It is the reality in Bangladesh. And
can I ask you, Shahanur, just before you conclude, to give us some of the examples of the other work that you do in terms of representing marginalized people and your LGBTQI work?
Yeah. Just I would like to share about my personal experience about represent the marginalized people in Bangladesh. In last year, in 14th of February, in Bangladesh, I tried to file a case against the land grabber who are grabbing the agricultural land, and they are the people of present ruling government, youth groups, and student group, the Bangladesh Chhatra League in Naugat district branch, and also the Bangladesh Juba League of one union president. Before submitting this case, in morning of 14th of February, they called one of my fellow journalists and threatened them not to file the case, and they threats to say me to not to file the case. But I don't hear about their threatening, and then I submit this case to the magistrate court. And after submitting the magistrate court, the court told me to they will give the just order a letter. In the afternoon, once the public prosecutor of Naugat district, he called me, he come to my office. I went there. I saw that there is two people sitting on front of him. And later I come to know that one is the president of Student League in Naugat district. It is the ruling student wings of ruling party. And also one of them are the president of Union Juba League. It is the youth group of the ruling parties. Then the public prosecutors trying to interrogate me. Why I am going to file this land grabbing cases? Why? And he tell me not to file this case. When I said no, I will do this. That times he threatened me about mentioning the case of the opposition party's leader Ilyas Ali. He told me, now you married, you have the kid. Do you know about the Ilyas Ali, who is now forced deference? If you subjected to forced deference or any problem, what your family will do? And he also threatened me, telling that how the magistrate received this case, he will see, he will monitor how dare the magistrate receive this case. And this is not a one incident. There is a lot of incident happened when you are trying to represent the this kind of vulnerable peoples in Bangladesh. And if it is the involved with the political party or religion, it is so difficult and it is so risky for the human rights defenders lawyers in Bangladesh. And as I already told that there is five lawyers in Bangladesh last year implicated in the Digital Security Act due to criticizing the government religion, and they implicated in the custody too. And another thing is that about the Digital Security Act, I would like to share that. Basically, when the allegation involved prominent figures such as Father of the Nations, the Prime Minister, and issue related to the Islamic religion, the defense lawyer frequently faced rejection of the bail from the lower court. And in this type of cases, the court always treat this as a severe offense. And in the lower court, they never give the bail. And they do not never give the bail, and they don't want to hear about the merit of the case. They no need to hearing the merit. Only they will reject if it is the involved with the prominent peoples and religions and Father of the Nations, Prime Minister in Bangladesh. And in this kind in this sector, there is no, they never maintain the actual accountability and also the standard of access to justice or rules of law in Bangladesh.
I'm just going to interrupt you there, Shahanur, because I think what I heard you say was that under the Digital Security Act, that's taken so seriously that they never grant bail in those sorts of cases, that, you know, that's obviously one of the many examples that you've given of extraordinary conduct in the courts. But I'm going to stop you now because it's already past 2, and I really want to give Kalpana a chance to speak as well. So let's try and do this and get back to some questions for everybody. So thank you, Shahanur. I'm going to move on then to Kalpana to hear your experiences, please, looking at the low-paid workers and the garment industry, which is another side of what's happening in Bangladesh. Thank you, Kalpana.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ashrafuzzaman, for having me. And it was great to hear the 3 panelists. It is not that I'm not aware of any of these, but it is great to hear from their experience personally and when they're working on. And I lead the workers group in here. So my most of work with garment workers and other sectorial workers too. As you know, the Bangladesh is second largest apparel producer in the country, in the world after China. And we have 4 million workers are working in this sector. But not, I mean, when it says that the government is our backbone of our economy, but not necessarily that our workers are being treated that way. The workers in garment industry is lowest paid in the world. Our workers' minimum wage is, I think, $85 now because of the inflation a month. And it's not enough for one person full month cost, and let alone if they have 2 children at home. And during these days, you know, when the cost of living is in the pinnacle and workers mostly sometimes like struggling with their small children, or they had to cut menu not from the adults, also from the children. So this is how they are being living. And when we talk about rights, like one of our rights are right to organize and right to bargain. And our constitution in Bangladesh gives us that rights. So do our labor law that gives our rights. But in practical, when workers try to organize or join with union to have their negotiating power, they're being threatened, beaten, falsely charged, and forced to leave the community. And top of that, thousands of them get blacklisted. So next time when they try to get job in other factory, all their data get pop up, and they're being listing there the troublemakers. And who handle this data is the Factory Owners Association, which is not expected or accepted at all. But this is what we are facing in here. And most recent, the Shahidul Islam killing, no doubt it is giving a chilling effect to this community, the workers community. And this is not new even. 11 years ago, precisely 11 years ago, we lost another colleague named Aminul Islam, and we yet to get justice for Aminul case. Aminul was disappeared, and following morning, his body has been found 100 kilometers away. When police found him, the postmortem and autopsy report says that he has been, under his right knee has been drilled by sharp object and led all the blood flow from his body, and his all toes has been smashed, and he was suffocated to death. And we who live in Bangladesh, we totally understand that who did it, but no one got arrested. A person who has been taken him in particular day, he was a factory worker, but he named factory worker, but he was undercover security intelligence source. So, and that guy even not been arrested. So this is, how justice looks like in here. And Shahidul Islam murder case, just evidence that all the complaints we are raising for years about low wages, about the law enforcement law is not enforced in this factory, about factory safety, about workers to prevent joining union, and it is all true. It is all true. And this is evident in here. And what if we raise voices? It's not easy. I was in prison for a month, just raising voice and helping workers to increase their wages, like raising our voice and helping workers to raise their voice to increase the wages in that 2010. I was arrested with my 2 other co-workers and was in prison. My co-worker severely beaten in the police custody, and he was about to crossfire, which is extrajudicial killing. Luckily, his luck favored and he saved. But still, we are fearing that, we are living in that fear that we cannot promise our family that we'll be safe back home when we leave home in the morning. So, despite all odds, we are fighting in here with a hope that, when we defeated, we just wanted to step forward with a hope that organizing can make a difference in here. But not necessarily that hopes comes true every time, especially like when I lost 3 weeks ago, my co-worker, Shahidul Islam. So we really don't know. Shahidul Islam was my co-worker anyway. He's from Bangladesh Government and Industrial Workers Federation. He was our Ghazipur district president. And he totally spent 1/3 of his life to improve the working condition of factory workers in here. And in response, he had to give his life. So this is not what we expect. And Shahidul Islam case being hearing in here, not necessarily that judiciary system is working, not necessarily that government really wanted to hear that or wanted to bring perpetrators in the book. It is, his case is being hearing because there is a tremendous international pressure is coming. And it's not expected that every time any injustice happens, you need to get a pressure from other part of the world to let your government to hear that what injustice they have been doing in here. I am the citizen of the country and I do have a right. I am the worker in the country and I contribute in the economy. I should have that my right. I should have that protection, but we have lack of that. So I don't know, in the audience, many of you are hearing, I would say that the best best way keep us supporting. I think all of us, we need support who are speaking in this panel. Every citizen in here, we are suffering regardless which class and which platform we are working in. So we need support to continue our work. When we say support, the solidarity support is most needed.
I'm going to say thank you. And I'm going to ask you a question first, and then I'm going to hop back to Shahanur because someone has put something in the chat, which is absolutely right. And I want to come back to him about that. But the point I really wanted to draw from you, Karpat, I must say I get butterflies in my stomach just thinking about the things that you have just said, that for fighting for proper wages for people women working in the garment sector, people are being killed essentially and targeted, and there is no justice, as we've heard from the other speakers. Once that happens, there will be no investigation as to who did that and hold people to account. But this is, as you've just said, 4 million workers. It's the second largest garment industry in the world, exporting to all parts of the Western global North, UK, US, Europe. These are very powerful countries with which trade agreements have to be struck in order for that industry to succeed and to support Bangladesh. How is that being, I know you work with the Circle NGO. How does that work for you? Does that not offer you some leverage with the Bangladeshi government?
It does. If you check the history, in 2012, the US government has suspended their business treaty with Bangladesh, which is named as a general system of preference. All these business treaty does help to create job in here, but who create this business treaty or write this, they should have the strong bar on it. When they talk about worker rights and human rights, they just should not mean that in the paper, they should mean that in the reality as well. A proper investigation really needed. what we all need, we really need these jobs that has been created in here, but we want them with dignity. And in order to ensure that dignity, all the actors need to fight together. They just should not, write some kind of business treaty or kind of like legislation that doesn't have a safeguard for workers or human rights defenders in the ground. And also, if we don't have any access to justice or access to remedy, then those kind of business treaty really does not help people like us. So all the models of business treaty at these days, it doesn't have, defenders' voice included. We can reach out to them, but not necessarily that we can sue them in their country or the native country. So the organization like Circle are really helping to bring these voice in other part of the world. And the Circle is tirelessly working on having living wage legislation, and that is not for Bangladesh, it is for regardless every country. So yes, we are working on it, but we just cannot, seeing these people in the ground like Shahidul Islam or Aminul Islam just killing, not even to raise the wages, only to raise their voices to get workers outstanding wages.
Yes,
So
that's right.
this is just not done.
Outstanding wages that were owed to them, not even to get an increase in wages.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. That is an extraordinary story. I thank you so much for your shocking presentation, really. We have now, we've got a few minutes left. I'm going to just go straight to the chat box that I can see. And there's a question that's being asked of you, Shahanur, to, this is because we're running out of time. So I cut you short essentially to talk when I asked you about marginalized communities, but the question is really about your work around the LGBTQI community, and that there's a community that's very much under threat in Bangladesh, and just I think basically asking for your experience of working with that community in Bangladesh. If you could want to say a few words about that, please.
Thank you. That in 2022, the LGBT communities in Bangladesh face severe threats, death threats and killing, and also the physical assaulted, psychological abuses, and attempt to suicide, job suspension, kidnapping, determined, and also harassment, ransom, and extortion. According to our report, we documented the violence against LGBTQ peoples in Bangladesh 2022. According to the report, we monitored and documented there is total 46 incidents happened and resulting around 198 victims. And amongst them, the 10 individuals were killed. And 5 were attempted suicide due to their mental health and struggle they faced. And also in 16 incidents, 148 individuals was physically assaulted. And there is alarming situation is that there is 3 teachers. They were suspended from the their institution due to their sexual orientation. And also 9 was kidnapped and 10 individuals were detained by the local people and also the police. And there is 17 people experience of psychological harassment and physical harassment, and 5 were subjected to ransom demand, and 17 were implicated in false and fabricated cases, and 15 amongst them, 15 were arrested and imprisoned.
How does your work, how successful can you work? How successfully can you work for such clients? It sounds like it's not something that's going to be very well received by the courts, let alone the investigating authorities.
Basically, in Bangladesh, the trans people are most accepted, but others, the lesbian, gay, and bisexual, they are not accepted, and they are most of the vulnerable in Bangladesh. And in court system, victim of trans people, they are receive oil, but others, they are not sensitized about others orientation group, and always they think this is the input. They also think that it is the against the religious sentiment.
Okay, I understand. Okay.
So there is some issue also.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm assuming that when you do your work, you do talk to the community, don't you? I mean, that must be part of your work.
Yes, I have some network member in Bangladesh. Also some also the queer community and LGBT peoples. I have a network, and I always consult with them, and they send me the information about the incident, and by this network I receive the information, and also working to campaign and also provide the support.
But presumably also that places them at threat. Just to raise their voice and just to come to the court must place them at threat, as also if they identify themselves and bring a case to the court.
No, we do not disclose their identity during the court or any others. We always keep their identity in secret.
Thank you very much. Well, that's also, again, fascinating. There's lots more questions about that, but I want to just, as we're coming towards the end now, I want to turn back to Zaman and to Sultan, because we've heard from Kalpana about, the sort of the clear links with the international community and the potential there for making some change. Obviously, it's very slow and it's been very, it hasn't been very developed so far. But so I just wanted to ask you, just because if we're looking at solutions and if we're looking at how to change the situation in Bangladesh, what do you think, is there a role that international corporations or bodies upholding human rights standards in more international can play in forcing the hand of the Bangladeshi government? Zaman first.
All right. Thank you very much. It's a very interesting question. There are many things, internationally could be done. One is, of course, if you go to the universal jurisdiction of the United Nations system, it's extremely slow. So it is good, but not much effective. The other issues, like if you go to International Criminal Court, for example, enforced disappearances is defined to be a crime against humanity under the Rome Statute of International Criminal Court, and Bangladesh is a party to the Rome Statute. So technically, there is the problem of approaching the ICC, but again, the ICC must have demonstrated interest in handling that, and I don't see that. The other part is that what can work? The most effective one is sanction. The sanction on two parts. One is what the United States has used, and I hope the other governments who have that kind of instruments, including the United Kingdom, they must be encouraged to do this, exercise it for the sake of protection of human rights and democracy, rule of law. At the same time, the United Nations sanction, when some people commit these grave human rights crimes like extrajudicial executions and enforced disappearances and systemic torture in all these facilities that they operate. And that includes everybody else. Like if today a group of workers of ready-made garments, if they take to the street to demand their outstanding overdue wages, they will be in a bunch. Hundreds of them will be detained arbitrarily and will be brutally beaten. And nobody talks about them other than a few people like Kalpana Akhtar and all who raised voice, they can't see Shahidul Islam, or Amirul Islam. So in this country, now all these bloodless people are going to serve the peacekeeping mission. Isn't it a double standard that murderers will be rehabilitated in international peacekeeping missions? So the United Nations responsibility to introduce a scrutiny system so that, of course, the entire force is not, nobody's required to ban them, but individually, every individual soldier or officer must go through a scrutiny process and making sure that.
Oh, I think his connection problems have solved themselves by disconnecting him. We hope he'll come back, but I'm going to turn to you, Sultan, with the same kind of question and see. Sorry, Zaman, I've just moved on because your connection timed out for a moment, but come back to you in a second. I'm just going to turn to Sultan to see whether he had any. Looking at sanctions, I mean, what you know, from the UN or from the US, we've heard there are some. What do you think is most is the solution here?
Thank you, Ashrafuzzaman. I think Bangladesh, like many authoritarian regimes, there are hardly any remedies domestically, because the court system, all the grievance handling, redressal system is not working. So there has to be some external push and just to hold the regime and the perpetrators accountable. I think Zaman has laid out the UN system, what can be done at the ICC, at the United Nations, at the universal jurisdictions. But there are, I think, some positive steps from the United States, and I'm aware that some colleagues also tried to have United Kingdom on board, but unfortunately they backed away last moment. So I would probably advocate you, Ashrafuzzaman, and your colleagues just to do the due diligence in the UK and reach out to more people, so the violators of the human rights, the abusers of human rights, at least some sort of accountability can be established, or at least some efforts can be done externally. And UK, United States, Canada, and Western European countries. I think they are the most important partners in this journey.
The one question is, I mean, which governments, which overseas governments are currently involved in offering support to those who are oppressed in Bangladesh? Apart from the US, you mentioned the US, you said the UK hasn't done very much, and Canada possibly is also offering some support. Are there any other major players in this situation?
I'm aware for a more collective collective actions from the international community. I think we reached out to some colleagues in Australia, so I think they are working, but no concrete action governmentally. And our colleagues, I know friends and colleagues are advocating heavily within the European system, and EU has issued a statement just a few weeks ago. So yeah, people are trying to move bits and pieces. It's tough because the regime has tons of money. They are recruiting lobbyists and this and that. So I mean, it's a hard fight hard fight against any autocrats with international backers, like some very powerful regional countries, and you know who I mean. So it's not going to be an easy fight. So that's where I think people like you and us has to do more.
Okay, so I'm now going to offer, I think I'm going to offer Shahanur, Kalpana and Zaman also just a last word before we draw to a close. Is there anything, Zaman, I'll come to you because you were cut off in your prime earlier. So do you have a last thought to offer to the people who joined this webinar?
One of the things for the Western developed countries also need to commit is that their soil must not be the safe havens for the perpetrators of human rights who have a plan of spending their age of retirement and living in a lavish life and the laundered money that often they have earned through extortion and also corruption while in office as in different government institutions, including judiciary and the law enforcement and security forces. So, and many of them have assets in the countries like United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and United States. So these people, of course, it should not be a policy of any government that, okay, let the money come, we don't care about where is it coming from or how it is originated, but there must have some human rights commitment, the commitment for democracy. When we mean it, then we must have demonstrated a commitment for that, and that should apply in the case of Bangladesh to be a deterrent, use that as a deterrent effect to stop this. So that I would request all the parties involved to demonstrate their commitment on this regard, so that democracy is protected, human rights is protected, rule of law is upheld. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Shahanur, a last word?
Yes, I think the international community should extend their support hands to the Bangladeshi local LGBTQ community organizations to providing them more moral, technical, and financial support, so that they can continue their activities for the advocacy and train them to speak out. It is more essential right now for the international community support to the Bangladeshi LGBT communities, and I ask all of their support.
Thank you so much. And Kalpana, the last word goes to you.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity again. I would say to all those consumers, basically, when they are buying the clothes, they just shouldn't go for price, color, style, and size. I think they can go beyond and start asking more questions to the brands that the workers, those are producing these clothes, or the defenders, those are working, they're working under what circumstances? Do they have living wage? Is those workers have union boys? Are they treating well? Is those factory gender-based violence free? While that vast majority of women worker, I think those will be start ringing the bell to the bosses' offices, and also ask that the workers should just not have a job; they should have this with dignity. So a consumer can play a vital role on it.
Fabulous. I'm going to say on that note, we're going to conclude the panel today. Thank you so much to Shahanur, Zaman, Sultan, and Kalpana. I really appreciate the extraordinary presentations that you have given us today of, as I've said already, a bleak and chilling situation in Bangladesh. And thank you for joining us and sharing your experiences and taking time out of your busy schedules to do so. And thank you also to our most valued audience. I hope you've all found today's discussion engaging and also enlightening. So on behalf of the Executive Committee of the Bar Human Rights Committee, we look forward to welcoming you all again for future events. And so do look out for our announcements later in the year, and also for the publication of the Diminishing Democracy report. Thank you very much for joining us, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Thanks. Bye.